Hello, my dear students and the rest of the learners. Welcome to part 25 of a 29-part series of tutorials in Fundamentals of Structured Programming using C. In this presentation, we are going to be looking at the topic or subtopic by the title, Searching for an Array Element using Linear Search Technique. My name is Memati M, or you can simply call me Emily Swap. What is searching? Searching is the process of finding out the specified element, or if the specified element is present in an array and determining its position. This is mostly important because sometimes you may need to carry out an operation on an array and want to determine whether a certain element exists or not, especially if that element is to play an important role or it is to be used in determining a certain activity or an action in an array or when using an array. Sometimes you may also want to know what the position is an element in the array. If, for example, an array or elements in an array have been stored in a certain order, you might want to know the position that is being occupied by a certain element, especially like when you want to do ranking of the elements. And therefore, it is sometimes important for you to know if that element is existing, and if it is existing, at what position is it in the array. One of the methods that can be used to make such a search is called the sequential or linear search. This simply means that there are other methods that can be used to search for an element, but what is most important is the existence of the element and sometimes not the technique that is used. Of course, there are various reasons as to why other techniques are applied, some of which may include the speed of searching for an element, especially if the array contains very many elements, or even the efficiency of using a certain technique. And therefore, depending on the reason as to why you want to apply a certain technique, then that is what may determine or may make the user decide to choose, or a programmer decide to choose or make use of a certain method. However, regardless of the method that is used, other than for those other reasons, like saving of time, the important aspect or the important reason for searching is to find out whether an element exists or not. So that if there is another subsequent operation that's supposed to take place, you don't waste the time carrying out that operation if the element required is absent. And therefore, in this presentation, we are going to learn how to make use of sequential or linear search in finding out whether an element exists in our array or not. Searching is therefore a method of finding an element, or linear search is a method of finding out if an element exists, or finding out an element by comparing each element in the array with the element that is being searched, and more so in a sequential manner. It entails checking each of the elements in the array, one at a time, in the sequence in which the elements have been stored until the desired one is found or missed. This searching is therefore carried out by searching from the first element in the array until the desired element is found, or until an element whose value is greater than the value being searched for, especially in the case of where elements have been sorted in either ascending or descending order. So until that element that is greater than the element which is being searched for is reached, or until the end of the array is reached. Therefore, the searching can be carried out on a sorted or unsorted array. The following is therefore a program that makes use of functions to search for an element in the array using linear search algorithm and displays the element on the screen. And of course, if the element is not found, the message that the element is not found is also displayed. So this is our comment, or this is the comment for our program. And the first comment is that this program uses linear search to find a value using functions. We have a preprocessing directive, which we are used to in writing C programs. Then the next comment is for functions prototypes. And what we have here are the prototypes for our functions. Our prototypes are, or what we call the functions declaration, include input score, which is not expected to receive any parameter, but is supposed to return a value to the main function. The second one is the function prototype by the name linear search. Now, this function called linear search is expected to receive an array together with the array size or the number of elements that that array will contain. And it is supposed or expected to return a value to the main function, and that value is supposed to be of type integer. The next prototype is displaying finding or display finding as the name of our function. It is expected to receive two values. One is a parameter by the name location, which is supposed to receive a value of type integer. And the second one is a parameter by the name score, which is supposed to receive a value of type integer. This function is not expected to return any value the corner. That's why it is preceded by the word void. Then we go to our main function. Now, in the main function, we have the following. One is a declaration of an array. Now, this statement is declaring an array or a memory location underscores that is expected to hold several elements, in fact, 10 elements, all of them of type integer. So all these 10 elements will be stored in memory location with the same name, scores, and that memory location is supposed to hold the values of type integer, and then it is being initialized with the following values: 45, 90, 20, 53, 100, 15, 78, 34, 11, and 60. This simply is a one-dimensional array because the elements, our 10 elements, are simply enclosed in the opening brace and the closing brace in this sense. We are also requesting the processor to set two memory locations aside, one called score and the other one called location, which are expected to hold the values of type integer. Then this statement is invoking the first function by the name input score. Now this function or this statement is telling the processor to go look for the function called input score, perform the activities that are supposed to be performed by that function, and then return a value. And once that value is returned, the main function, that value should be assigned or stored in the memory location called score. And therefore, once this statement is invoked, that is input score, the processor will go and look for the function called input score under the function's prototypes. Then it will find out that this function has been declared, indicating the format of the function. But because it is not defined, but just declared, the processor will then go and look for the definition of the function called input score. So once this statement is encountered, and rent, the processor will go after main all the way to the function definition called input score. So once the control is brought at this point, the processor will do the following. One, it is being told to set the memory location assigned for the value. So value is a local variable within the function called input score. It is being told to set the memory location assigned called the value and is supposed to hold the value or data of type integer. Next, the processor is being told to display the following statement on the screen. Enter the score you are searching for. So this message will be displayed on the screen. Next, the processor is being told to read the value which is going to be entered by the user. And that value should be read and assigned in the memory address or in memory location called value. And the data which is supposed to be read is supposed to be of type integer. Then from there, once that is done, the processor is being told to return the value. Pick the value or data in the memory location called value. And that is the data which has been entered by the user, and send it back. Send that value back to the calling function. So once this statement is invoked, and this brace which is informing the processor that is the end of the function, the control will then be taken back to the main function up to this point. So the value which has been returned by the function called input score will be brought here, and then that value will be stored in the memory location called the score. And therefore, this data type here called score, or this variable here called the score, will hold the value which has been returned. Meaning, by the end of this statement, already there is a value in the memory location called the score. Next, the processor or the control will be taken to this statement, which will be invoked. Now, this statement is telling the processor to go and look for the function called linear search and carry with it the array called the scores and the value which has been stored in the memory location called score. So this function is being invoked. The function called linear search is being invoked, and as it is being invoked, we are passing into that function two values, one or two variables. One is the variable called the scores, which is an array, and the second one is the value which has been stored in memory location called the score. In fact, this is the value which has been returned by the function called input score. And then once that function called linear search is executed, and as you can see in the prototype, it's supposed to return a value. Therefore, that is the value which will be stored in the memory location called a location. Therefore, when this statement is executed by the processor, the control will be taken to the prototype, the declaration for the function. And this will tell the processor that the function called linear search, which is supposed to receive two parameters, one of type array, or that is one is array of type integer, and the other one score of type integer. Now, and then it's supposed to return a value of type integer. So once this function or once this prototype is encountered, the control will then go and look for, or the processor will go and look for the function called a linear search. So the control will be brought to this point. It will encounter this statement, and because it's a comment, nothing will be done by the processor. And therefore, the control will be brought to this function header. Now, there are two values, the two values which have been passed to this function called linear search will be placed at the following parameters, the array that's the memory location for the array, will be brought and be received by the first parameter here in the parentheses. That is int scores, and it's an array. And then the other value for the score will be brought and be held in the parameter or in the placeholder on the score of type integer. From there, the process will be taken into the function or in the body of the function. Now, in the body of the function, the first activity that the process will do is to set a memory location assigned called I, which is supposed to hold the value of type integer. From there, the control will be taken to this for loop. Now, what does this for loop do? This for loop is telling the processor to do the following. One, initialize the memory location called I with the value 0. So 0 is being stored in the memory location called I. Next, the second part of this for loop, which is I less than score, is telling the compiler or the processor to compare the value which is stored in the memory location or in the parameter which has been received in the parameter on the score, compare that value or that data with the value or the data in the memory location on the I. At this point, my dear students and the rest of the learners, in I, the memory location called I, we already have 0 assigned. While in the score, we are going to have the value which has been passed to this function. The value which has been passed to this function from the main. So it will compare value 0 with the value which has been received. If what is in I is less than what is in score, the processor will enter in the loop and do the following. It will compare, or it will execute this statement, which is saying if scores I is equals to score. Now, this statement can be interpreted as follows. The processor is being told to compare the first element in the array. Remember, it is scores I, scores 0. So this statement is telling the processor to read the value which is in the memory or in the array, to read the first value in the array called scores. And that first value is scores followed by index 0 or subscript 0. That is the first element in the array. So it is being informed or told to compare the value, the first element in the array, with the value which has been received. So if, for example, scores I contains 10 and the value which has been received is 10, it means that if 10 is equals to 10, then return the value found in the memory location called I. So in this case, it will return 0. It will return 0 to the caller. So it will return 0. And if the value found in scores 0 is not equals to score, it will return -1, meaning nothing has been found. So this for loop or this linear search function, its main work is to compare between the element which has been received, the value which has been received, and the value which is stored in a certain memory location. Now, my dear students and the rest of the learners, let me expound this one further. Let me explain this one further. I repeat, from this point, I have said that this statement is going to compare between the value which is in the array, the first value in the array, that is called 0, with what has been received. And I have said if the value in the array, the first element in the array, is equals to the value which has been received, the processor is being told to set the index, that is the content of memory location called I to the main function. Now, before you go to this section, if this value here scores I, that is now score 0, is not equals to score. Now, it will not return, of course, it will return I, it will return the address. I repeat, a correction. And my dear students and rest of the learners, this is very important for you to understand. Let me begin here, make it easy for you. I have said, first, the processor here is being told to set memory location assigned called I, which is supposed to hold the value of type integer. So that's a local variable, the function called linear search. Next is this for loop. And this is how for loop is going to work. And my dear students and the rest of the learners, if you have challenges with the for loop, I would advise you to go back to the series, one of the series in this presentations, where we talked about loops. That is under the control structures presentation on the loops, and we discussed for loop so that you can know how for loop works. However, we can still proceed and remind ourselves about how this for loop will work. This is the same as the for loop we discussed previously. So this statement is telling the processor to do the following. One, initialize memory location called I with the value 0. So 0 is being assigned in the memory location called I. So by the time the processor encounters the first semicolon, that is I equals to 0, semicolon, it means that the processor will have assigned or stored 0 in memory location called I. So currently, memory location called I contains value 0. The next part of the for loop is the condition. And the condition is the process being told to compare between the value in the memory location called I with the value which has been received. So if the value of I is less than the value received, like in this case, I is 0. So if 0 is less than the value received, do the following. If or compare the first element in the array, that is called 0, the first element in the array, compare it with the value which has been received to see if they are equal. So if the value in the array, the first value in the array, that is called 0, is equals to the value which has been received, then the processor is being told to return or send back the index or the position of that element in the array, or simply the value in memory location called I to the main function, So what that means is, like now, if the value which is in score 0, if that value is found to be equal to the value which has been received, then what will be sent to the caller is 0, value 0. That's the value, the current value in memory location called I. Then once this brace is an accountant, the control will be taken back to the for loop, but for the last part of this statement. And the last part is incrementing the current content of memory location called I with 1. That is I followed by increment operator. And the increment operator, the I plus plus simply means it is I equals to I plus 1. So the current content of memory location called I will be added 1, and that value will be assigned to the memory location called I. So because currently I contains 0, so it will be 0 plus 1, which is 1, and that one will be assigned back to the memory location called. Then the control will be taken to the part for the condition. The processor is being told to compare between the current element in the memory location called I with the value which has been received. So if 1 is found to be less than the value which has been received, the control will be taken to the next statement, which is to compare scores 1 with the value which has been received. That is the second element in the array with the value which has been received. If they are found to be equal, if they are found to be equal, then the possession of that element will be sent to the main function. And in this case, the value which will be sent back is 1. Then once this place is the countant, the control again will be taken back to this part of the statement, the last part of the for loop, which is for implementing the current content of memory location called I. The current content is 1. So this statement is 1 plus 1, which is 2, and then this 2 is going to be assigned to the memory location called I. So we now do comparison. The process will compare between 2 and the value which has been received. If 2 is less than the value which has been received, then the control will be taken to the loop or inside the loop and compare. Compare scores 2, that's another element in the array, with the value which has been received. If they are found to be equal, the position for that element will be sent to the main function. And in this case, what will be sent is 2. And that will continue, that will continue, that will continue, that will continue until when the value of I is no longer less than score. And then the control will be taken out of the for loop and it will return or send -1 to the main function. Now, my question is this, my dear students and the rest of the learners. At what point will return I be, or at what point will return 1 be done? When will -1 be sent to the main function? It will be sent to the main function if during all this time, the control, if the processor does not find any element matching with the score. That means if there is nothing which would have been returned, because if the value or the elements in the array, if a comparison is done and there's no element which matches with the element which has been received, nothing which will be returned by the function called linear search, nothing which will be returned. And therefore, if this for loop does not return any value, if that it does not return any value to the caller of the main function as I, it means that I is still empty. And therefore, before the function ends, it will return -1 to the main function. That is, if this for loop does not return any value, meaning that there is no match which has been found. So because the function must return a figure, what it will return is -1. So -1 will only be sent to the main function if there is no match found between the element received as a score and all the elements in the array. So when the comparison is being done until the last element is compared and nothing is found, the control will return -1, the main function, and the control will be taken to this point. Remember, if a comparison is found, if a value is found to be equal to the value which is being searched for, that value or that position, that index, or the content in memory location called I, that value will be stored in memory location called location. And then the control will be then to the next statement. And the next statement is telling the processor to go and execute the tasks found in the function called display finding. And as it does that, it should receive or send with it two values or two memory locations. One memory location is location, and the other one is score. So this function is being invoked and being sent two elements or two values. One value is the value found in the memory location called location, and the second value is the value found in memory location called score. And therefore, when this statement is executed, the control will go to this part of the prototypes and find out that display finding is a function which does not return any value to the caller, but it is supposed to receive two values, one called location and the other one, the parameter called score. So the two values which have been received are supposed to be placed in this or will be placed in the location or in the parameter called location and in the parameter called score in the order of arrangement. But because this is a declaration, the processor will then proceed after main and look for the function called display finding. So the control will be brought to this point, and the two values which are in the memory location called location and the one in memory location called score, or the two values, one in the parameter called location and the other one parameter called score, will be received and will be placed temporarily in those two placeholders. In the placeholder for location, the value which has been received as the first one will be placed in this portion, and in score, the scored value will be placed in that placeholder. Then from there, this function is being told to do the following, or the processor will do the following. It is being told that if the content in the parameter called location is greater than -1, display the following on the screen. Pick the value in the parameter called score and display it as the first value, followed by the following ones. Was found at index location. Pick the content of the placeholder called location and display that value as the last part of the statement. So if, for example, in the parameter called score, we have 20, and in the parameter called location, we have 2, then the statement will read as follows. 20 was found at index location 2. Then from there, it's being told, if the content in memory location called location is not greater than -1, display the following. Read the content of the parameter called score. For example, if score was 20, it will be read, and then being displayed on the screen, followed by the following ones, not found in the array. So if, for example, in the parameter called score, we have value 20, then the statement will read as follows. 20 was not found in the array. Then move one line down. And that will be the end of that function. So once this is encountered, it is telling the control or the processor to take the control back to the main function. So the control will be brought to this point here now, where it is being told that that is the end of the program, and the process is being requested to take the control back to the operating system. So my dear students and the rest of the learners, that is how that program will function. Let us now proceed and code this program in Falcon IDE so that we can see how it is going to behave. However, this program is expected to behave in the same manner that we have discussed. I would therefore like to advise that you copy this program. You copy this program in your exercise book, or you can code it using a word processor, for example, or text processor, for example, Microsoft Word, WordPad, or even Notepad, and then you just copy this program in your Falcon IDE once you load it, and then you save it, you compile it, and you run it so that you can see how it is going to behave. So what we want to do is we are going to proceed, load Falcon IDE, and then we code this program in the same way that we have discussed it, and then we run it so that we see how it is going to behave, and so that we can see whether it is going to be able to identify for us the elements in the array, that is in this array, and tell us the position of that element, or if an element will not be found in this array called scores. And therefore, let's load our Falcon IDE, the program, by of course clicking on start, and then we can search for Falcon. Remember, you can start this program in the same way or in a different way based on how you do it in your computer, whether by selecting it from the start menu or by the use of an icon from the desktop. Once you have loaded your Falcon IDE, we can proceed and create a project. So we click on File menu, point on New, click on Project. Remember, throughout the entire series of presentations in C, I have insisted that whereas it is easy to go straight to writing a program, it's always good to organize your programs or your files in terms of projects. So let's give this project of ours a name, and the name we are going to give is searching array element. And then our compiler type is C. We click on Finish. We can then right click on our project's name and click on Point on New, then click on File. We can rename this default file name with the name of our file. And remember, I've always said, give your file a name that is meaningful. So I'll still call it searching array elements. From there, you can now proceed and type your program here, or you just copy the program you have typed in a word processor and paste it here, and then save it, run it, or save it, compile it, and execute it as follows. So let us paste our program here. So this is our program, the one we have just discussed, which I've said you can just code directly on this Falcon IDE, that is a Falcon editor, or you can just copy it and paste it in the editor. So let's indent our program nicely. Let's indent our program nicely that way. Always remember that indentation is very important because it helps you to make your program readable and also easy to understand. You're able to understand what each of the sections is doing. Because if your code is not well organized, debugging may become a challenge, and even understanding the flow may be a challenge. That's why it's always advisable to indent your program nicely. So there we have our program. We are done with decoding our program, just as I've explained. So we can save our file by clicking on save all. The same the reason as why it's good to click on save all instead of just save is to allow the processor save not just the file that you have coded, but also the project and any other related file. You select your location, you type your file name, and then you click on save. If it already exists, you can click replace. You can override that. That means, or you expect to get that kind of an error if you had coded a file with the same name before. So we have replaced the one which was existing, and now the program which you are executing is the one which you have saved now. So we click on run, and then we compile our program. As you can see, our program compilation has been successful, and that's why at the bottom here, we are getting the message, compilation success, in 0.0.719 seconds. Our program has no errors, so we can proceed and run our program by clicking on run, then run. Let's see how our program is going to behave. So already, you can see that we are getting the message, enter the score you are searching for. So this means that already our processor is executing the set of instructions in the function called input score. The rest has been done. The array has been declared, it has been initialized, the elements have been stored in our array, and now we are being asked to enter a value that we want to find, whether it is in the array or not. And this is being done by the function that we have looked at called input score. So let's enter a value. I can, for example, type 3. And then we press enter. You can see that we are being told that 3 was not found in the array. So this means that already the function for linear search has been executed, and this message is being returned by the function called display finding. So there's no element in the array called 3, and that is true because the elements in our array are 45, 90, 20, 53, 100, 15, 78, 34, 11, and 60. Let's run again. We look for another element. So click on run, then run. This time around, let's look for an element that we know is existing. We see whether we are going to be told the position or its index. Let me type 100. Then we press enter. We can see we are being told that 100 was found at index location 4. That means fifth element. Let's see if that is correct. The first element is 45. The second one is 90. The third one is 20. The fourth one is 53. And the fifth one is 100. 100 is index number 5. Number 4, because the first index is 0. And that is true. Let's press enter and search for another element. Let's search for element 60. So I can type 60 so that we see whether it is going to give us the subscript 9. You can see we are being told that 60 was found at index location 9, which is okay. And with that, my dear students and the rest of the learners, that is how we write a program for searching for an element in the array. We can now close our program and exit. And my dear students and the rest of the learners, that marks the end of part 25 of the series. You can now proceed and listen to part 26 of 29 of the series, in which we are going to learn about structs. That's the data structure that we call structs in C programming. And our focus will be on the introduction of structs and also on the program demonstrating how to implement structs. Congratulations for learning part 25 of 29 on searching for an array element using linear search technique in fundamentals of structure and programming using C. You can access the rest of the parts in the series, as well as other computer or ICT videos, by clicking or tapping on Emily Swap ICT YouTube channel below this video. To subscribe to the channel, tap on subscribe button below this video in YouTube if it's not currently being subscribed. For any further correspondence, kindly write to us through the email emilyswap@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening to me. Let's meet in part 26 of the series, and God bless.